Today's story was written by Reddit user ShneekeyTheLost. Ambassador Jim Prescott reached for the bottle of medication, having found the viscous pink liquid necessary as more information concerning the assault on New Tatooine unfolded. Part of him was sickened that he'd played a part in what happened, that he'd been played by politicians back home. Over 25 million confirmed dead now, almost half the population of the planet, not to mention everyone that were in the orbitals or out in the belts. Maybe some politician had thought it would require a horror just like this to justify what was certainly to come, and maybe that politician was right. But it was still an indelible stain on his personal honour, a blot that would remain until the day he died, a day that will come later than those souls who had been in the Hanath's way. The Hanath ambassador sneered when he didn't show up to the next Galactic Council meeting. It assumed that he was traumatized by the loss, and that he was too afraid to show himself. While there was trauma from the tragedy, yes, that wasn't why he didn't attend. He didn't trust himself, and it would be a poor accounting of human diplomacy to personally kill the dirty bug with his own bare hands. However costly the price, at least the mothball fleet had become ready, and in far shorter time than he had feared it would. That was another indicator of his suspicion that someone had deliberately permitted this atrocity to occur. Political wheels had moved far too rapidly to have not been planned out in advance. The other thing, the faint silver lining, is that it was now proven beyond a shadow of a doubt what the Hanath are willing and able to do if they think they can get away with it. They've demonstrated to humanity the danger they represent, far clearer than any report, be it ever so strongly worded. After all, if they'd done this with some level of civility, if they'd simply conquered without committing wanton slaughter, things might have turned out very differently. But they demonstrated what they were capable of. Now it was humanity's turn, and the galaxy at large will see what humanity is capable of when you insist on war without rules. May God have mercy upon us all, Jim thought to himself, and may the rest of the galaxy at large be willing to speak to us again after they see what coin we pay in kind with.
What do you mean we haven't secured the surface yet? It's been over 2 weeks, and these are supposedly civilians. Why haven't they been pacified yet? Are your troops afraid of civilians with no significant weapons to speak of?
General Pat Kailau met the Admiral's gaze evenly.
I lost nearly a quarter of the invasion force on the first day of landing, Admiral. I won't have the courage of my soldiers insulted. A quarter? How by the first egg did you lose so many? I knew you were of secondary caste hive, but I didn't realise they'd sent a complete incompetent to handle the job.
The Fleet Admiral sneered at the General.
How? Because it's a mining colony, you vacuum-sucking ingrate? Those thinking savages still use explosives. Yes, they use actual chemical explosives to do mining with, which also works quite well as improvised munitions. The entire initial landing blew up when we made the mistake of using their own landing pads, only to discover them to be rigged. I lost nearly 1/10 of our assault shuttles in an afternoon, but down in the mines, it's actually worse. They don't hesitate to collapse their own tunnels on us, even if it doesn't catch many anymore. It still blocks lines of aggression until the rubble can be cleared and the tunnels reinforced, which delays action still further. It's not like I'm getting any orbital support like I was supposed to, Fleet Admiral. The mines are too deep, General. I can blow up any surface target you care to identify any moment you wish, but not even my orbital strikes can sink that deep into the ground. Admiral, priority alert from the main sensor array. We have incoming hypertube.
One of the officers at their station interrupted the briefing before it could get any more heated. The Admiral and the General give each other a glance, but they may be upset with each other, but they both knew their jobs and their positions within the Imperium. The General left without further word, letting the Admiral handle the situation.
"How big?"
was the Admiral's first question.
"Big, sir. If the hyper equipment is on par with the galactic average, I'd say easily twice the mass of our fleet, maybe more,"
the officer on station dutifully replied. The Admiral's next command was almost instantaneous, as he realised that it couldn't have been a friendly force.
"Flag to all units. We have incoming hostile. Exit orbit immediately and enter combat formation."
No one wanted to be caught pinned against the planet in the face of an incoming hostile fleet, and receiving a decisive and sensible order brought a sense of calmness to the crew. If they were going to ride into combat, at least their commanders knew what to do.
"Update. Unknown fleet has exited hyper. Initial count indicates 86 independent masses. Sizes?"
The Admiral was mildly surprised that the humans had scraped together so many hulls. There were, according to his sources, fewer than 100 vessels in their entire navy, none of them bigger than a frigate. Had those cursed Crackneth loaned them a few vessels? Dealing with primitives was one thing, but he'd a healthy respect for those molluscoids and their proper naval vessels.
"CIC has identified 30 ships massing somewhere between destroyer and cruiser class, 30 somewhere between cruiser and battleship class, 20 which mass 25% larger than any known battleship class, and 6 which were roughly the size of a Pollux class cargo vessel." "Are any identifiable as being of Crackneth make?"
The Admiral doubted it, given the oddball sizes reported, but that was the only way to explain what must be 6 missile colliers. Unless they were troop transports, expecting to have to retake the planet on the ground.
"Negative, sir. None of the vessels are even remotely the right mass readings for any known Crackneth vessel. Querying CIC to determine origin."
The officer was busy on his console. The Admiral was pleased with his subordinate. It had accurately predicted what the Admiral's next order was, and was already executing it.
"Now, I don't know where these ships came from, but with 6 missile colliers, they're clearly conventionally equipped, which means they might actually put up a fight. So move into defensive formation, Bravo, until we know what we are dealing with." "Sir, the enemy has launched,"
another member of the tactical team reported.
"What, from this range?"
The enemy fleet was still dozens of light minutes away. Did they expect to use a ballistic phase between stages to try and clear the gap? The Admiral did not dare countermand his previous fleet order, or try to shift its formation into a new one while under fire. The term order, counter-order, disorder sprung firmly to its mind.
"Update. The launch appears to be some type of drone. They certainly aren't launching like a standard missile pattern at least,"
the officer of the sensor watch replied. Ah, drones. That made more sense. Everyone in the galaxy knew about drones. Basically longer range but slower missiles really. More manoeuvrable, bigger drives, but easy targets for counter-missiles. And they were bulky enough that you couldn't mass them like you could missiles to oversaturate missile defences. About what he'd expect from primitives. Still, with those 6 cargo vessels behind to feed them a continuous supply, they were at least a threat to be respected.
"Tactical, pass the defense officer the trace. DO, keep a hard track on those drones, and keep your threat profile updated. They might just have the legs to get here after all." "Aye, sir, but if they can't pull off more excel than they're showing now, I could spot them half my sensor array, and still pick them off long before they get into engagement range." Yes, I know. Still, don't let your guard down. They may be a primitive sort of weapon, but at least it is an actual weapon."
"Sir, I have an incoming message from the hostile fleet," the communications officer spoke up.
"On the main screen,"
the Admiral quickly replied. He wanted to see who was courageous and stupid enough to try and pull off this tactic.
"I am Admiral Karl Yankov, in command of 16 Reserve Fleet. You have attacked a civilian colony without provocation or warning, causing millions of casualties, and have invaded a Terran Federation system. This is your one and only opportunity to surrender unconditionally. Failure to do so will result in the destruction of your entire fleet. Over to you."
The sad fact of sublight communications at these distances meant a significant time lag between communication requests. This message had to have been sent moments after exiting hyper. Gutsy of the fellow at least.
"Live mic,"
the comms officer intoned.
"Admiral Yankov, I am Fleet Admiral Kacharum of the Hanath Imperial Navy. This system is now Hanath territory. I respect your courage, even as I lament your lack of intellect. If you think a few drones are going to intimidate us, you have a lot to learn about how your betters handle combat. Allow me to give you a lesson, brief though it may be. It will be a shame you won't live long enough to profit from it."
He gestured to the comms officer.
"Mic clear,"
it dutifully intoned.
"Fleet command to all ships. Continue in defensive formation better until we close to a range of 10 light minutes. At that point, we shift to offensive formation Alpha. All ships, make ready to fire on my command at that range. Flag officer out."
"Sir, the drones appear to be keeping station at their fleet. Perhaps they are reconsidering the wisdom of their aggressive action," the tactical officer spoke up.
"Doubtful. I don't know where they got their ships, but they're definitely here to die for their honour. Maybe they're worried about early proximity kills and keeping their drones within their point defense basket until they get close enough to sprint the gap."
The Admiral was thinking out loud, but it was as solid a theory as any. One counter to drone waves was to set up a wide spread of proximity-fused missiles. Since they were slow and possessed no point defense to speak of, it isn't too hard to use a regular missile salvo to decimate a much larger wave of incoming drones. Even before they enter actual point defense range, it was generally seen as wasteful, but it was certainly successful. Puzzling, these humans. Whatever trick they think they have, it can't be anything the galaxy hasn't seen before. Whatever ruse you think is so clever will not work. You're as good as dead. Admiral Yankov sat in flag ops overseeing the fleet as the response came in. At the mention of drones, he sharply looked at his tactical officer. "Is there any chance they could have seen our drones? They're already out ahead by a good bit." "Doubt it, sir. At least they haven't reacted to them. Maybe they're talking about the string ships." The tactical officer offered a counter-suggestion. "From what Millant says, no one much uses these parasite ships, which means no one has a clue of what kind of firepower those 6 Enterprise-class carriers can pack with their string ships. They might have mistaken them for the shuttle-sized suicide drones we've had a couple of reports about." "Possible. In either case, do we have any kind of fix on their nav patterns yet?" The Admiral didn't expect any reasonable result yet. No one would be stupid enough as to have such a simplistic evasion algorithm in the face of an enemy fleet. But the longer they got a look, the closer they got to finding a solution. "As firm a lock as you please, sir. Get this, they have no erratic manoeuvring at all. Their entire fleet is moving straight as an arrow. Didn't even need to query the quantum coprocessor." The scorn in the tactical officer's voice was harsh, but not unwarranted. Quantum coprocessors were expensive toys that gave military ships their unmitigated edge in combat. Quantum processing was much hyped when someone came up with a way to do it without needing cryogenic temperatures, but while they were enormously useful at collapsing a variable state, they could never replace conventional processors. However, they could augment them, especially when you had a very large data set of possibilities to sort through, such as decrypting an algorithm or calculating a firing solution. Well, they think in terms of missiles which still have gas left in their tanks to be able to handle erratic maneuvers, so why bother wasting the cycles evading something that will just home in? From that perspective, it makes sense, but it is not going to do them any favours when we bring them in range. I'll be generous to them. Aperture-class dreadnoughts are cleared to engage at 8 light minutes if they continue to give us free shots. If there's any left, the rest of the fleet can engage as they can range. "And for the string ship, sir?" his tactical officer prompted.
Hold position to thicken point defense until their first launch. Then we'll see from there. It was a cruel irony that their focus on energy weapons meant most of their ships had precious little in the way of systems dedicated to point defense. Of course, given their main batteries could fill the role just as well, went at least some way to mitigating that flaw, but having nearly 1,000 string ships with their quad pulse lasers hanging around should help offset that deficiency. That worried about a few missiles, sir? The tactical officer's tone of voice was the epitome of politeness. A few? No, but some of these reports have hundreds and even thousands of missiles per volley. I value my people's lives. The only thing that happens from an excess of caution is the bugs get to live a few minutes longer after all. Don't worry, those pilots will get their chance, never fear. We've got quite the laundry list of locations where their particular skill set will be invaluable indeed. As you say, sir, the tactical officer replied with professional aplomb. Missile trace, the sensor officer announced. Numbers, the Admiral snapped back, more sharply than he intended. We have 350, that is 350, missiles inbound. Look pretty densely clustered as well, our drones are getting good readings. Is that all? Well, looks like we've overestimated them. Good. Message to Wing Commander. You are free to engage the incoming missiles en route to your targets. If there's any left for us to deal with, you buy the beer. Little fear of that? The tactical officer muttered under his breath. The Admiral, with his soft smile, pretended he didn't hear it. Fleet Admiral, their drones have begun their sprint. Well, I guess one might call it a sprint if they were being generous. More like a vigorous stumble, and a disorganised one at that. The sensor officer's disgust at the drone's flight paths were clear, and with good reason. They could have made a fairly reasonable speed had they been moving in a straight line in an organised formation. However, they weren't. The disorganised mob was more a cloud of sensor blips than anything coherent. I suppose they must have taxed their targeting platforms with their numbers. Either that, or they just don't have enough control channels and are having to rotate control. The number of drones was impressive, no doubt, the Admiral thought to himself. They must have flushed every single drone packed into those colliers to drum up a launch that large. But a rotating control pattern invalidates a drone's sole advantage of manoeuvrability. Still, one can't have that debris field, masquerading as a drone swarm, clutter up local space. Give me a proxy launch just to be certain. Perhaps he was being overly cautious, but he preferred to err on the side of caution. After all, once those drones were taken care of, his opponents were all but defenceless and he could eliminate them at his leisure. Sir, status update. The drone swarm has overflown our initial salvo and... Go ahead, spit it out. The Admiral wondered what could have affected the sensor officer so badly. Our initial salvo, it's gone, sir. What? The Admiral shouted in shocked disbelief. The drones, sir, they appear to be outfitted with point defense clusters. They engaged the launch at half a light minute. Since the missiles didn't recognize them as a threat, they didn't even try to evade. At first, rage threatened to consume the Fleet Admiral, but logic soon followed and calmed him down. Point defense, you say? His tone of voice was calm and professional, almost too calm in the mind of the officers present. That appears to be the case, sir, the sensor officer confirmed. Well, that explains why they were held back until after our launch, despite a drone's theoretical range advantage. But they got too cute for their own good. Sir? The officer was confused. They just shot their missile colliers dry to stop one volley. What are they going to do against the 49 others we have just on internal tubes alone? And since those drones have point defense clusters, they aren't packed with explosives. Plus, point defense clusters are expensive to run, and you don't have room for a fusion reactor on a drone, which means it has to be running on auxiliary battery, which was probably just spent. In other words, they're basically kinetic platforms now, a mass with engines. No threat whatsoever. The Admiral waved an appendage, then added, Oh sure, it's a cute trick, engaging missiles outside point defense envelope to fool its ECCM package into ignoring it. but it isn't going to save them, not in the long run.
The Fleet Admiral reluctantly gave the flesh bags the credit where it was due. It was a clever trick, one that would have to be taken into consideration in future engagements, but all of the humans' reputation for unorthodox thinking won't save them from follow-up salvos. They'd spent 6 missile colliers worth of mass to stop a single salvo. The old saw about spending millions to save dozens came to mind. He would almost pity them. Almost.
Alright, fleet order to Aperture-class dreadnoughts. Activate the twin gravitic lenses and prepare to fire,
Admiral Yankov ordered. One of the problems that had plagued directed energy weapons was a matter of attenuation. Firing a stream of photons, or whatever energy wave you like, worked better in a vacuum because you didn't have atmospheric distortion. However, when you're talking about targets several light minutes away, the problem became one of focus. The beam would gradually widen until it basically became an oversized flashlight. The gravity lens was humanity's answer to that. A small concave gravity field that acted much like a focusing lens, one that could be adjusted to put a focal point on target. Of course, they weren't cheap to operate, which is why the biggest ones required something the size of a dreadnought to mount them. But it also meant they had the furthest theoretical focal point. The bigger problem, at least against fleets that understood the threat, was a matter of aiming. Space was vast, and directed energy weapons were merely light speed. In other words, if your target was several light minutes away, it would take several minutes for your beam to reach them, and if they performed any course correction during that time, they wouldn't be in the place you thought they would be. This was at least partially mitigated by the quantum coprocessor, who could analyse a ship's movement patterns and, with some degree of accuracy, postulate a dataset of possibilities that had a higher chance of being correct. Further refinement followed until you had a reasonable firing solution. It was rare for a first volley to actually hit, but the data recovered from the initial volley was valuable in further collapsing the data set down to a few predictable results, and thus increasing the accuracy of subsequent volleys. Human navigators had adapted by plotting erratic course corrections as a normal part of their duties. Some likened it to creating a symphony using prepackaged evasion patterns as leitmotifs, which were woven together to create orderly chaos, to the utter ruination of most tracking packages, and sharply decreasing the weapon's effective range. Except these bugs didn't understand the concept of evasive manoeuvring. They had shifted their formation before they began firing, but that was the only course correction they had made, which meant the petawatt range main batteries on the Aperture-class dreadnoughts were about to carve through their formation like a hot knife through butter.
Have the drones identified their flagship?
The Admiral asked calmly. Combat drones had been a part of combat for longer than humanity had travelled between the stars. These days, their job was to obtain and transmit information back to their fleet. They had small but powerful FTL comms packed into them. The bandwidth wasn't much to write home about, but they didn't really need a lot of bandwidth for the numbers they were reporting back, and it gave the Terran Federation a distinct advantage if anyone did get any bright ideas about attempting to manoeuvre.
Yes, sir. Shall we target their flagship first?
The tactical officer's grin was predatory.
By no means. They wanted to teach us a lesson. I want their flag officer to understand the magnitude of its error before it is permitted to follow its personnel. Save the enemy flagship for last.
It was a small cruelty, but one that carried no consequences for his fleet. A tiny down payment on debts owed. Fleet Admiral Kacharam of the Hanath Imperial Navy was observing the tactical station carefully. The Terran Federation fleet had continued to advance in the face of his next volley. There was something unsettling about that. Say what you will about charging an armed person with your bare claws being brave, it was stupid. This wasn't just a stinking savage being ignorant. This was nothing short of suicidal. Granted, they hadn't had any military conflicts in over a century, but it refused to believe that any military who just threw their lives away would last very long. This didn't make sense, and it didn't like it when things didn't make sense. That's when it happened.
Admiral, 3rd Division is reporting engineering casualties,
an officer stated from its console.
Admiral, 2nd and 4th are also,
a second officer exclaimed, more concerned.
Admiral, status update. Some sort of directed energy weapon is coming from the Terran Federation ships. Tracking points to these oversized battleships.
His tactical officer reported.
It appears to be the cause of these engineering casualties.
Sir, 2nd Division is now down to half its fleet strength. All of these coming one on top of the other threatened the Admiral's calm. Carefully, it quieted down the fear that began to gnaw. Panic never helped.
Admiral, I have a message from the enemy force.
On screen, the Admiral demanded. I hope you understand what is going to happen to every fleet that gets in our way. I'd explain it, but you don't have much time left, and it is rather involved. So I'll get straight to the point. This is the 16th Reserve Fleet, of 30. While we are here recovering our property and saving as many lives as we can, the others are already on the offensive.
3rd Division now down to 4 vessels,
someone in the background shouted.
5th Division has lost division command, devolving to local,
another officer exclaimed. Other reports were flooding in faster than CRC could handle, but Kicharan focused on the message the humans had sent in the middle of their attack. As you have rejected any notion of honourable combat, we have accepted your terms. As you have rejected the concept of rules of engagement, we feel ourselves to be similarly unconstrained. While Admiral shouted, all ships hard course correction, 20 degrees on the elliptical, realising that somehow, some way, these primitives had managed to create an energy beam capable of damaging and outright destroying ships at this range, it understood its only chance of survival: evade and manoeuvre back out of range. The message, which had been recorded and transmitted several minutes ago, continued. You'll notice your ships blowing up all around you by now, I suspect. Yes, that's our doing, and we're going to continue doing it. You had your chance to surrender. You'll also notice that your ship has been exempt from the attack so far. That, too, is intentional, because I want you to witness the utter destruction of your fleet before your turn comes.
3rd Division it's gone.
A voice tinged in fear noted.
2nd Division no longer has any effective units.
A somewhat more professional but still rattled voice stated.
5th Division has been destroyed.
Another voice spoke from the background, but the Admiral's focus was on the message before him. The human recording continued. And as you witness this, imagine, if you will, this happening on a far grander scale. Imagine how this will turn out when our forces arrive in your inhabited systems. They're already halfway there by now if they are following their schedule. Your people won't get a chance to understand what it is they are fighting, just like you didn't. Imagine this very scenario playing out over your birth world. Imagine it playing out over your capital system. Imagine that's exactly what is going to happen. And as you imagine those scenarios, remember that your actions and your deeds are what prompted this response. Your Imperium will fall, and you are responsible. Take that thought with you to hell. Throughout all the chaos around it, all the klaxons and alarms and the shouting and yes, even the panicking, it seemingly remained calm. It thought about giving orders, but what was the point? The course change hadn't altered the effectiveness of their targeting. At this point, there wasn't much it could do. It pondered the human's words. It stood from its console and stared at the tactical display. Everyone in the room saw this, and looked at him for orders. It then saluted its crew. As fine as any he had ever served with. A crew good enough to die with. 10 seconds later, it did just that. As the concentrated fire of 20 ships he never knew could exist caught his vessel and turned it into so much floating debris. 6 hours later, and 16th Reserve Fleet were in a parking orbit. Having sustained no casualties and having eliminated all hostile naval forces, the Hanath troop transports had attempted to surrender, but the problem with these distances was a matter of time. By the time the troop transport had messaged the fleet to surrender, and that message had arrived to the fleet, they had already been fired upon. Not that surrender was an option anyway, but it salved Admiral Yankov's conscience to know that he couldn't have accepted their surrender, even if he had wanted to. Comms, send message back to HQ. Message reads, fumigation successful, all clear to send aid. The Transstellar FTL comm was a fickle thing, with even a lower bandwidth than the in-system version. Worse, anyone who actually knew how they function might be able to listen in if they were within the line of effect, which is why they were routinely sent in code. He wasn't a hyperphysicist, he didn't know exactly how it worked, nor did he need to in order to use it, but it was something no one else had apparently had, an advantage humanity intended to keep under its cap for as long as they could. It would take a few days for the Red Cross to send a humanitarian aid fleet. In the meantime, his boys had some initial search and rescue to do. Half of his string ships were on SAR patrols in the belts and the debris of the orbital stations that hadn't deorbited yet, searching for signs of emergency life pods. He didn't have much hope at this point, but any hope was better than none. Admiral Yankov wondered how the other reserve fleets were handling their missions. He was very grateful for the increased automation of the reserve ships. A single naval patrol frigate's crew could just about operate one of the Kilroy-class cruisers, if they had to, despite the cruiser being almost 20 times its size. Heck, even the dreadnoughts were able to be crewed by no more than twice a frigate's crew allotment. Although most of those extra bodies were in weapons targeting and engineering stations, it meant that they could actually crew the ships that had been pulled out of mothball from the Great War without needing to resort to conscription. And it meant their response could be had in weeks, rather than years it would take to train up even green crews. Part of him was frankly a little terrified at the capabilities they had deliberately set aside when these vessels had been put into a parking orbit with their atmosphere vented. Now that he fully understood exactly what these ships were capable of, he knew why they were mothballed. They were too good at what they did. The temptation to misuse them would have been tremendous. But floating out in a parking orbit, carefully shielded, they suffered no corrosion. It was like opening a time capsule, perfectly pristine and preserved in vacuum of space, ready to be put into service once again, should a sufficient threat arise. And now that one has, these great giants of war have once again been filled with a terrible resolve and set into motion, and they shall not rest until that threat has been neutralized. The Galactic Council session is in order. First issue on the docket, Terran Federation has a declaration to announce. That caused a murmur among the crowd. For the past 2 weeks, the Terran Federation's ambassador had been absent, following the news of the loss of one of their colonies. The human reached the podium on his ledge and spoke. My galactic neighbours, it is with a heavy heart that I must announce that which has already been obvious, that a state of war now exists between the Terran Federation and the Hanath Imperium. As such, I have been instructed by my political superiors to state for the record that what is about to happen to the Hanath is our most extreme response, and prompted only by the most extreme of circumstances. Had they been more reasonable, they could have avoided their fate. Had they even a shred of decency or compassion for their fellow Sophon, they could have avoided their fate. We prefer to fight war with restrictions, with rules of engagement, because if we do not, well, you get what is about to happen. Please try to remember that we did not want this. We did not ask for this. And I ask the General Assembly that you do not hold it against us in future diplomatic discourse. I leave the floor open. The Hanath Imperium has a response, the computer intoned.
War? Really? You declare war on us? You pathetic little vertebrates. This wasn't war. This was just a special exercise and a policing action. You want war? We'll wipe you out. We have thousands of ships with weapons you apparently cannot comprehend. How do you expect to survive in the face of our military might? I eagerly await your response."
The ambassador's tirade ended with a chittering of amused rage. "The Hanath Imperium has yielded the floor to the Terran Federation for response," the computer noted.
"We do not recognize an ambassador of an already dead polity. But if you are wondering as to how we think this will play out, let me say this. To wage war upon us, you would need to muster your ships, to plan logistical supply lines to follow them. It would be months of planning and coordination to have an invasion fleet ready."
The human paused for emphasis before continuing.
"Our fleets are already en route."
A murmur went through the room. The human gave it a moment to sink in before continuing.
"Given the physics involved with hypertunnels, you don't have time to warn them before our fleets arrive, which is why I've been permitted to speak on the matter. The Hanath Imperium will cease to exist no more than 3 standard weeks from this point. I can only hope that the people living under its boot heel can form a new polity, one less aggressive. I leave the floor open."
"The floor recognizes the Hanath Imperium," the computer states for the record.
"Do you just expect us to let you attack? Your bluffs are empty and hollow, as are your words."
After a moment, the computer intoned, "Due to lack of further response, the floor is now open." And after a brief pause, adds, "Terran Federation has the floor."
"You do not comprehend what your political superiors have done. I doubt you ever truly will. Let me ask you a question. What is the most important thing in war? I yield the floor to the Hanath Imperium."
After the computer records the change in speaker, the Hanath ambassador responds, "Force projection, of course. Wipe your enemies away and see the stragglers running before you. And what do you consider to be the most important thing in war? Over to the Terran Federation for response." The computer dutifully recorded the transition, and the Terran ambassador replied, "Information. Force projection does you no good if you don't know where and how to apply it. Second in importance is logistics, because it does you no good to project force if you cannot sustain it. Third in importance is force projection, and that's your problem. Information. It takes time to transmit information between the stars. Even with the most efficient hypertunnels, it takes time. You're on the wrong side of that time lag, and you don't even realize it, and that is why your polity is as good as dead. Not, I wish to point out to the General Assembly, your people. We don't wish to commit genocide ever again. We simply object to the polity which has conducted this action, and seek to remove it, root and branch. The day you invaded and committed atrocities against us is a day that shall live in infamy, and not just because of your atrocity, but because of what will come next. Just remember, when you come before this assembly for the final time, this could have been avoided. That is all. I yield the floor to the General Assembly." The General Assembly had collapsed into utter chaos, as Jim had predicted it would. The Hanath were seen as one of the most powerful military forces in the galaxy. That the newest member would not simply court a military exchange, but declare war on them was bound to ruffle some feathers and pseudopods. Hopefully, he fervently prayed, it would be the last time the reserve fleet needed to be activated. His hands were busy with a device that was currently disassembled. With long practiced ease, he inspected it. He found a measure of comfort in cleaning the thing, a more elegant weapon from a less civilized age. The grand chamber of the Galactic Assembly had tight security, as one might expect. However, all of their weapon scanners searched for energy sources capable of powering handheld energy weapons. None of them had any chemical sniffers, a defect he suspected they would be correcting in a few weeks.